Alright YouTube, so we are back with some FF7 Remake content. One thing I'm looking forward to a lot more with this game than I ever thought I would is the boss fights. And I say that because prior to this year, with all the information and gameplay that we've received, I would not have expected all the boss fights to be so unique, at least the ones we've seen so far. Like, without any information from this game, I would have expected us to just fight these bosses in a 3D environment. They'd probably have their special unique attacks, but I would not have expected them to be so in-depth like they are. Like, right here, the very first boss from the original game, the Guard Scorpion, now called the Scorpion Sentinel for some reason, has like 3 or 4 phases that you fight him in. He jumps up onto the wall, so you gotta use ranged attacks to fight him. He has a shield that pops up, and you gotta attack like some spot underneath his tail to drop his shield, and he can also grab your teammates, so you gotta attack him to make him let go of them, and he can also destroy part of the environment through one of his phases and drops debris down that you gotta hide behind to protect yourself from his tail laser attack. Like, that is beyond what I ever would have expected them to do with the very first boss in the game. Like, he's an iconic enemy because he's the very first boss that you come across in Final Fantasy VII, but he's honestly nothing special, but that's the level of detail they're putting into this game. Every boss fight matters. Even a seemingly throwaway boss fight from the original game with Apps, now called Abzu, actually feels important. He's a mostly forgettable boss fight outside of the fact that he's actually attached to the wall market segment, which of course is one of the most memorable things from Final Fantasy VII. But he's an insanely easy boss fight to the point that he actually damages himself with his big attack, Sewer Tsunami. But when it comes to the remake, the fight is obviously very different. He can actually jump up to a higher point similar to the Scorpion Sentinel. He also has a power-up phase where his horns glow red and you're able to actually target them specifically and break them off. What exactly is different in this power-up state, I'm not entirely sure. There's also puddles all around the battlefield that he can do an attack with that, if you're close enough, will damage you. He also has an attack that's more than likely the newer version of Sewer Tsunami, but this time around it does not damage him because he jumps off the battlefield, but you also got to be in a specific spot for it to damage you. And lastly, a small but kind of interesting moment is that when Ifrit actually catches Abzu on fire, he actually jumps into the water to put himself out. So as you can see, these are 2 seemingly throwaway boss fights from the original game. They're not very difficult at all, but you see the level of detail they put into them with the remake. The only other boss fights that we've seen so far are Airbuster, which I'm not sure what's unique to his boss fight just yet, because we haven't actually seen extensive gameplay like we have for the Scorpion Sentinel and for Abzu, but it does seem like he can kind of fly into the air, and he hovers beside the bridge and can float away from the bridge, so you're going to have to use ranged attacks against him. And then we also have Eligor, who was not a boss from the original game, but he has this unique cutscene where he's surrounding the characters, and we also see that Shiva is used against him, which summons can only be used against certain powerful enemies and bosses. Now, I have no idea what would be unique about his fight, but he qualifies for summons to be used, so he's got to be somewhat strong. And then one that's kind of like an honorable mention or something like that is the sweeper fight that we've seen at Tokyo Game Show. These were just common enemies in the original Final Fantasy VII, but this fight takes like 4 or 5 minutes or something, so it's got to be considered at least a mini-boss. Now, if we're looking at the original game, Midgar only segment, there's actually only 9 boss fights, 11 if you include their minions. We have the Guard Scorpion, Airbuster, Apps, Reno, Sample, the little Sample Bug, 100 Gunner, Hella Gunner, Rufus Shinra, the Dark Nation dog that's with him, and then of course Motorball on the highway. So we can probably assume that all of those enemies are still going to be in this game and still probably boss fights, but there's going to be new boss fights. As we've seen, for one, Eligor looks to be a boss fight now or something like that. And we've also had Tetsuya Nomura hint at Motorball not being the final boss of this game, even though he was the final boss of the Midgar segment in the original. And that's what's got me excited about the boss fights from this game. For one, seeing the already established bosses from Midgar, what they look like, how their fights play out, what's unique about their fights, but also the prospect of new bosses. Now, it's hard to speculate what new bosses there would be because they're new bosses. How can we possibly guess what they're going to create? But if we're looking at the enemies that are in Midgar, I think Hellhouse is a good shout. He's a far more interesting enemy and fight than Eligor, and Eligor seems to be some sort of a boss fight when it comes to the remake, so I could definitely see Hellhouse being some sort of mini-boss or boss fight in the Sector 6 slums. Other than that, we have the established characters from Midgar, so you could have more fights with the Turks possibly, and even the Shinra characters. We actually fought Palmer later on in the game, so maybe we have a Palmer fight in Midgar. You also have Heidegger, Scarlet, Hojo, and a lot of people want Rufus to actually be the final boss of this first game, since he takes over Shinra after his father dies. Past that, if we're going off the assumption that maybe we can attack other Mach reactors in this game outside of the 2 that we attack in the original, there could also be giant robots protecting those. And there's also rumors and speculation that they might put cut content from FF7 into the remake, and if that's the case, there's a rumor that they might put in the Red 13 clones, Cobalt 14 and Indigo 15. This was something cut from the original game where after capturing Red 13, Hojo made some clones of him that we would have had to have fought. And we're supposed to have fought them at least twice throughout the game, one of the fights taking place in the final dungeon. But to kind of wrap up the video, I'm actually looking forward to the boss fights more than I thought I would have for Final Fantasy VII Remake because they all seem to be unique and have unique aspects to them that are exclusive to those fights. So as always, I pass up to you guys in the comment section. What are your thoughts on the boss fights coming up in Final Fantasy VII Remake? Which ones are you looking forward to the most? And if you have any ideas for new bosses, what are they? Either way, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new and want to stay updated with more Final Fantasy VII Remake content. Turn on notifications. Follow me on Twitter at @TheDashingDavid. And my Discord, links to my social networks are in the description. And in the outro. Later, guys.
Give me a smile, give me forever for a while, give me forever for a while. Quit acting like a baby, or at least less like